At this moment, we'll hear from the moderator of the 147th General Assembly, the Reverend Dr. Robert Faris. Look forward to what you have to share with us.
Thank you, Moderator. It's funny to say that. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to my advisory committee over the past year. It's maybe something that we don't recognize as fully as we should, but they are a very important group to help the moderator to define what some of the priorities will be in the year and where the travels will take you, and to be a good sounding board for some of the things that you're experiencing and feeling in the role as moderator. So my advisory committee was Zara Brown, Daniel Cho, Candy Grant, Margaret Mullen, Jeffrey Murray, and Sue Senior. And a particular thanks to Sue, who chaired the committee and carried us through our various meetings. I also want to, right at the beginning, thank all of the congregations, the presbyteries, ecumenical partners, and others who invited me to visit over the course of the year. I think it's something that everyone should be aware of, is that the moderator responds to invitations to visit. So if you wonder why a moderator doesn't come to visit you, but visits somebody else, that's the reason. It's being in touch with Terry Lee and inviting the moderator to come to speak or to be with you for a particular event. So I would encourage you to think about that with our new moderator and with moderators to come, to invite the moderator to come, to be with you, to hear what you're up to in your congregation or your space, and to also have some reflection back from the church as a whole. I was so delighted to visit almost every province in the country. I'm sorry that I didn't make it to Newfoundland and Labrador. I hope that personally I can get there again very soon. But for everyone else, it was just a wonderful experience to be welcomed and to have such interesting conversations and interaction with Presbyterians and others across the country, and in fact in other parts of the world. I think, as many of you know, and it was in the report, I had two foci for the year as moderator. The first was to be in conversation with people about the ways in which the church is becoming more welcoming and more inclusive of all people, and particularly of those of us who are 2S LGBTQI+. It was often noted that I was the first openly gay moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and that did have a particular historical significance after the decisions that were made over the past few years. I was very encouraged to speak with people who do identify as 2S LGBTQI+, and to have some of their insights into what's happening in the church and in their lives. The other focus of the work, or my year as moderator, and it was work, I'll have to say, but joyful work, was connecting with and understanding more deeply how we're living out our confession to Indigenous peoples. I was deeply moved by those encounters, and I'll speak a little more about that later. But I think it is essential for us as a church, as a denomination, and together with our ecumenical partners, to prioritize that relationship and the truth-telling and reconciliation that's still required. I did, as part of the first focus, march in a couple of pride parades. I think the first moderator to do that in Toronto and also in Calgary, to be part of an interfaith pride service in Calgary. And during Advent was part of an ecumenical series with other church leaders, including National Bishop Susan Johnson, who's sitting over here, of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, and also Linda Nichols, the primate of the Anglican Church of Canada, and Carmen Lansdowne, the moderator of the United Church of Canada. We did a series of 4 conversations among the 4 of us on one day of the week. This was all online, and then some conversation that was open through Zoom to anyone across the country who wanted to join in. And it was a wonderful opportunity to share with leaders of other churches and to talk about the things that we have in common, in particular, the challenges that we have in common. I took the lead on the 3rd of those conversations around God's love includes everyone and the inclusion of 2S LGBTQI people in our churches. I wrote in Presbyterian Connections about an experience in Alberta. It was on the cusp between August and September, and an invitation to sit in a circle in Grace Church in Calgary with Indigenous leaders and many other Presbyterians and people who were engaged in repatriating the Manitou stone back into Indigenous stewardship. If you don't know what the Manitou stone is, there is an article in Connections you can read, but it is the largest meteorite that has ever been discovered in Canada, and it was of particular significance to Indigenous people before colonization. The stone was taken by a United Church missionary. I'm not blaming the United Church any more than us, but it just happened to be a United Church person. It was held in Alberta and then at Victoria University in Cobourg, and then moved to Toronto, and then the Royal Ontario Museum, and it's now in the Royal Alberta Museum. They're working hard, and with the collaboration of the museum, to repatriate the stone. It was interesting in that circle to understand the importance of the stone for Indigenous people, but also how that conversation itself was related to the understanding of the importance of that stone as a place of gathering, a place of meeting, a place of trying to come to some kind of accord among people who may have differences. And that circle ended up being one of those spaces. And I was deeply honored and privileged to be a part of that circle, and I'm happy to see that that work is continuing. I was able to visit with most of the ministries related to Indigenous people that we have within the Presbyterian Church in Canada. I visited Place of Hope Indigenous Presbyterian Church in Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Inner City Mission, the Saskatoon Native Circle Ministry, and Hummingbird Ministry in Vancouver. And I was also honored to preach and to meet with the elders at Mistawasis Presbyterian Church, which is the only congregation on a reserve or in an Indigenous community of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. I spent time in Kenora at the Kenora Fellowship Center, and I was so honored and happy to be with Yvonne Bearbull, who was my guide, and through that visit. It was perhaps the most powerful moment in my time as moderator when we visited first the site of the second location of the Cecilia Jeffrey School, close to Kenora, And then we traveled to Shoal Lake, which is close to the border with Manitoba, where the first Cecilia Jeffrey School was located. It was moved, I believe, in the 1920s. It was on an island. I went to Manitoba and Saskatchewan in February. So there was an ice road to the island, which we traveled across as we arrived at the island. And this was with members of the 3 Shoal Lake Indigenous communities that pretty much all touch on the island. We traveled across the ice to the island, and for the first time, because of the growing agreement among those 3 communities about what to do with that site and its relationship with the Presbyterian Church, they raised Every Child Matters flag on the site. We traveled to the cairn that's there, and we spent time with some particular ceremonies, and we heard from survivors of the Cecilia Jeffrey School. It was a very difficult moment, but a very important moment. And we traveled back with the members of the community to a community center in one of the communities and heard a little more from the chief. And I was invited to say some words, and I asked if I could read our confession from 1994, which I did, and also mentioned that we are trying to live out a number of the recommendations or the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, including renouncing the doctrines of discovery and terra nullius. I wasn't quite expecting what followed, but I heard, in a way that I've never heard before, the pain and the anger of many people in that community about what had happened at that school, and the continuing pain that survivors are feeling, and also the intergenerational trauma of younger members of the community who are children and grandchildren of residential school survivors. There were a number of requests which I have brought back to the folks at the Life and Mission Agency. But it signaled to me that there is still a tremendous amount of truth-telling to be done, healing to be done, and reconciliation. But reconciliation is the last of those. And we must continue to be willing to hear the truth. As I traveled then across the country and met with Indigenous people, I kept that in mind, and I keep it in mind as I speak to you, and as I will continue to speak to people in our denomination as a former moderator, that needs to be a priority for us. It's essential to the life of our church to continue truth-telling and seeking reconciliation, healing and reconciliation. In addition to the opportunity I had and the ecumenical Advent experiences, I also had a number of other ecumenical experiences, one of which was to preach at the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity service for Greater Toronto. I happened to preach in my own congregation in St. Andrews on King Street. That's where the service was held. And it was quite fascinating to see the breadth of people and traditions and denominations represented in that gathering. I was also privileged to attend the church leaders event that was hosted by the Canadian Council of Churches. I was very honored and privileged to be able to travel to Taiwan as my international visit. And it was a great opportunity because I was able to travel with 8 other people, Presbyterians from Canada, to visit our partner church, the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan. I tried to gather a very diverse group of people to go with me, which included Kathy Reed from the Women's Missionary Society, Robert Griffiths from the AMS, Mark Chang, who's a minister in Edmonton, Yvonne Bearable from the Kenora Fellowship, and also a member of the Dakota Nation, Robert Revington, who's a PhD student at Knox College, Will Burr, who's a student at St. Andrew's Hall, Paul Wu, who's a minister at St. Giles Church in Ottawa and was born in Taiwan, and Zara Brown, who works with the Toronto District School Board assisting differently abled people in searching for employment. It was a very rich experience. We attended the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan. And I wanted to stress how important it was for them, for us, and for other global ecumenical partners to be present with them. As you know, there are tremendous threats to Taiwan from China, and for them, it's important to have an international presence with them, to indicate our solidarity with them as they speak out for democracy and autonomy and human rights in Taiwan. It was also for us a wonderful opportunity to meet with other global ecumenical partners, particularly for people from a variety of Asian churches who were there. And I wanted to say that it's also important in our assemblies here to have the voices of our global ecumenical partners. Thank you to those who have spoken already and to those who will speak to us in upcoming sederents. Your voices are so important to us, and I think it's so important for us to be taken out of our own particularities in our church in Canada, as important as those are, and to recognize what's happening in the world and the witness of the Church of Jesus Christ throughout the world. So thank you for your presence with us, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been one of those global partners in Taiwan. We heard a lot about George Leslie Mackay. His name is everywhere for those who don't know, and people in Taiwan are surprised that Canadian Presbyterians don't know who George Leslie Mackay was. He was one of the first Canadian Presbyterian missionaries to go to Taiwan and really established the tone and the direction of the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan. But we heard about others as well who had gone from Canada to be partners with the church in Taiwan. And we also had significant engagement with indigenous congregations in Taiwan and people involved in the church. I knew about that, but I wasn't aware that a third of the congregations of the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan are actually made up of indigenous people. And so there's a continuing struggle around language and culture, and not dissimilar to what's happening in our own denomination and in our own country. We also learned a good deal about the work of the church over the years and the continuing work in relation to human rights and peace and democracy in the country. So I would say some of the learnings and some of what I'm hearing also as I sit now as a commissioner in this assembly around where we're going as a denomination and as a church. I said a little bit about that in the sermon last night, and I think that's been echoed in some of the things that we've heard today in the assembly. I do think, as I said last night, that we need to use our imaginations or we need to be reflective of God's imagination of where we're being called to be the church in the kind of world in which we live. I think we need to use our resources and understand that we need to use our resources to invest in the future of our church. That will mean turning our heads around a little bit, but I think it's where we're being called. And I've heard that from people across the country, and not only heard it, but also seen it in a number of different initiatives that are taking place that are looking really toward the future and where God is calling us as Presbyterians. I hope and trust that we can continue also to live out the recommendations of Rainbow Communion. I'm being a little silent in the debate that we've just had, but I hope that in all that debate and in all that we do, that we can remember that to us LGBTQ people are people, human beings who are children of God. And we're not second class. We're not people to be discounted, but rather fully human and fully children of God. I'm grateful for this opportunity that has been given me over the past year. Mary, it's a wonderful opportunity, but by the end of the year, you are a little tired. And I'm kind of glad that the year is drawing to a close. I also wanted to say that I'm planning to retire in October, and I'm also moving to Montreal. So there's a few new and wonderful things coming up in my life. I'll just finish because I think my time is up, and this is Presbyterian time that you're talking about, Mary. So I just wanted to end by a few other words of thanks. First to my congregation, St. Andrew's King Street in Toronto, who have been incredibly supportive of me over the past year and have given me the space and time to do the work that I needed to do as moderator. And I'm forever grateful to them for that. And I personally want to thank, and I know the Assembly did this, but I want to thank Bill Elliott, who was my chaplain over the course of the year. We've met once a month at a restaurant to have lunch together and to just catch up. And he has truly been a chaplain to me and a listening person who has been able to give me some perspective and lots of help as I've been on this journey. I also thank my partner, Rada, and also my family members, particularly my sister Mary, and many other family and friends who have supported me and encouraged me over the course of the past year. And I thank you. I pray God's blessing, continued blessing, on this assembly and on the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Thank you very much.
I just want to say thank you. You've been a great support for me right from the beginning. I know you've had a wonderful year. You're very tired. So God bless you in your next journey.